What if the greatest shock to global power was not a bomb or a bullet, but a single, quietly filed document? A document whose effects would ripple outward, redrawing the map of wealth, influence, and destiny for billions. Picture a Europe transformed almost overnight. Factories that once roared with the promise of progress, their machines spinning day and night, now sit in a heavy, unnatural hush. Hamburg's ports, once bustling with endless shipments, are eerily still. The smokestacks of the Ruhr, which for generations sent plumes skyward as symbols of prosperity, now stand silent against a grey dawn. In the echoing halls of once proud industrial giants, only the distant hum of emergency generators remains. This is not simply a recession. It is the first chill wind of something deeper. A systemic unraveling, a slow-motion collapse that no alarm bell sounds, but which everyone feels in their bones. But this unraveling did not begin with tanks crossing borders or missiles slamming into cities. No, this was not the kind of crisis that makes headlines with images of destruction. Its roots lay buried in the bureaucratic undergrowth, a single official document, dry and technical, signed off in the Kremlin and quietly uploaded to a government web portal. Amid the daily blizzard of paperwork, few noticed. But for those who did, its implications would soon shake the highest offices in Berlin, Brussels, Paris, and beyond. History is filled with moments when a document changed the course of nations. Recall the Treaty of Versailles, quietly signed in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, whose clauses sowed the seeds of an even greater conflict. Think of the Magna Carta, a simple parchment whose ripples shaped centuries of law and liberty. In our own time, the digital age moves faster, but the power of a signature on paper, now perhaps a digital pen stroke, remains undiminished. The Kremlin's decree would soon join this storied list, not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty of a lever being pulled behind the scenes. What, then, was so earth-shaking about this decree? On its surface, it appeared little more than a technical adjustment, a new procedure for pricing Russia's exports. But beneath the legalese, it contained a bombshell. From now on, the price of Russia's most strategic resources, oil, natural gas, metals, wheat, fertilizers, would no longer be fixed in dollars or euros. Instead, every contract would be pegged to grams of gold. Gold, the metal that has survived the collapse of empires, the debasement of currencies, and the rise and fall of civilizations, would now anchor the value of the most sought-after commodities. To grasp the enormity of this move, consider the world as it stood in the early 21st century. For nearly 8 decades, the American dollar had been the linchpin of global trade. Every barrel of oil, ton of steel, and shipment of grain was ultimately settled in dollars. The petrodollar system, crafted in the aftermath of World War II and cemented during the oil shocks of the 1970s, ensured that America's currency was the world's reserve, its financial institutions the ultimate arbiters. The prosperity of the West, the security of savings, the very stability of daily life, all rested on this invisible architecture. Now, with a single decree, Russia challenged this architecture at its foundation. It was not the first time gold had been wielded as a weapon. In the 19th century, Britain's adoption of the gold standard brought unprecedented stability and global influence. In the 1970s, when President Nixon closed the gold window, it signaled America's willingness to defend its interests at all costs. Each time, the world shifted, and fortunes were made or lost overnight. Today, Russia's move echoed these moments, but with 21st century consequences. Let us return to the heart of Europe, to Germany, the economic engine of the continent. For generations, German industry relied on a steady flow of cheap Russian gas. BASF, the chemical behemoth in Ludwigshafen, built an empire on low-cost energy, producing fertilizers and plastics that fed and clothed the world. Volkswagen, BMW, and Siemens, names synonymous with excellence, powered their assembly lines with affordable fuel, outcompeting rivals from Detroit to Tokyo. But when the pipelines from the east slowed to a trickle, everything changed. Within months, German firms faced energy bills 3 or even 4 times higher than before, forced to buy liquefied natural gas shipped across the Atlantic from the United States. The cost of making a ton of ammonia or a roll of steel in Germany now exceeded the price of importing the finished product from abroad. Factories shuttered or moved operations overseas, sometimes to the very countries selling them expensive American gas. This was not merely an economic adjustment, it was a historic reversal. For more than 70 years, Germany had been the workshop of Europe, its prosperity underpinning the entire European project. Now, towns built around single industries teetered on the edge of ruin. The stories echoed those of the 1930s, when the Great Depression swept through the coal valleys and steel towns, leaving a generation adrift. In boardrooms from Munich to Essen, executives faced impossible choices: slash jobs and risk social unrest, or keep workers and court bankruptcy. In kitchens across the country, families watched the news with mounting dread. Politicians in Berlin and Brussels, bound by alliances and the promise of European unity, were caught in a vice. To break with Western partners and seek cheaper Russian gas risked political disaster, even accusations of betrayal. To stay the course meant presiding over the slow decline of the continent's industrial base, a process as relentless as it was silent. As the crisis deepened, all eyes turned east. Would Russia respond with force, escalating the conflict? Would there be a dramatic announcement, a new round of sanctions, or a show of military might? Instead, the answer came in the form of that quiet Kremlin decree. While the world's attention was fixed on potential explosions, the real earthquake was financial, and it struck at the very heart of the West's power. Could a dry, bureaucratic memo really unseat the financial order built over decades? The answer, as history shows, is yes. Consider the aftermath of the United States' decision in 1971 to abandon the Bretton Woods gold standard. In a single weekend, the world's currencies were set adrift, unleashing waves of inflation and market turmoil that reshaped economies for a decade. Now, Russia's move threatened to do the same, but in reverse, replacing paper promises with the solidity of gold. From that moment, every barrel of Russian oil, every shipment of gas or ton of grain, was no longer priced in terms of dollars or euros. Instead, contracts referenced grams of gold. Buyers could still use their own currencies, yen, rupees, even dollars. But the real amount owed would fluctuate alongside the global price of gold. Should a currency weaken, the buyer would pay more. Should it strengthen, the cost would fall. The common denominator, however, was beyond the reach of any government or central bank: gold, whose value resists manipulation. For Russian exporters and their clients in Asia, Africa, and beyond, the benefits were immediate. No longer would deals be derailed by sudden currency swings or sanctions freezing dollar payments. The chaos of exchange rates, the uncertainty of central bank interventions, these became relics of a fading world. Instead, every transaction was anchored in a substance that has been trusted for millennia, from the treasures of Tutankhamun to the vaults of Fort Knox. For Western bankers and traders, however, the very ground began to shift. Their profits depended on volatility, on the endless churn of currencies, the power to set prices, and the ability to exclude rivals from the system. Now, with Russia's move, the old levers of control began to fail. The City of London and Wall Street, for generations, the command centers of global finance, suddenly faced a world where their rules no longer reigned supreme. Imagine the scene on the trading floor of a major London bank. Screens flicker with gold prices, spiking as nervous investors rush to hedge. Executives phone government contacts, desperate for reassurance. In Frankfurt, central bankers convene emergency meetings, recalling the panic of the Lehman Brothers collapse. The old certainties are gone, replaced by a sense that the future is up for grabs. The implications for the dollar and euro, the pillars of Western wealth, are profound. If other nations follow Russia's lead, the demand for dollars as a reserve currency could collapse. Central banks, from Beijing to Brasilia, begin to quietly diversify their holdings, buying gold, and reducing their exposure to greenbacks. The effects mirror those of the 1970s, when oil shocks and inflation forced countries to rethink their dependence on American currency. The stakes now are even higher, for the entire global order is at risk. As the realization spreads, the initial shock gives way to anxiety. In boardrooms from New York to Singapore, leaders face the same question: how to adapt to a world where the rules have changed. Some hope the new order will prove temporary, a passing storm. Others sense that a permanent shift is underway, one that will reward the nimble and punish the complacent. Meanwhile, the world must choose sides, often in secret. The Kremlin's gold decree sends silent shockwaves through capitals from Riyadh to New Delhi. In Beijing, officials waste no time. Chinese banks and trading houses begin to rewrite their contracts, settling more and more trade in gold. The move is reminiscent of the 1930s, when nations abandoned the gold standard in waves, each seeking to protect its own interests. But now, the tide is flowing the other way, toward real assets, away from paper promises. In the Middle East, oil producers meet in hushed sessions. For decades, their prosperity has rested on the petrodollar, pricing oil in American currency in exchange for security guarantees. Now, faced with economic and strategic uncertainty, they consider new options. What if oil were priced in gold, or in a basket of currencies? The mere suggestion is enough to unsettle markets and raise alarms in Washington. India, Brazil, and other emerging powers see the writing on the wall. Their governments act swiftly, authorizing state buyers to use gold for purchases from Russia. Central banks accumulate bullion at a record pace, echoing the gold rushes of earlier centuries. For ordinary people, this means less vulnerability to inflation triggered by distant crises. For their leaders, it is a chance to hedge bets in a world where alliances are shifting and trust is in short supply. A quiet revolution is underway. Countries long constrained by the Western financial system now glimpse an escape route. No armies move, no borders change, yet the map of economic power is being redrawn. The world divides into two camps, one clinging to the old order of the dollar, the other rallying around gold and real assets. The competition is silent, but the stakes could not be higher. For individuals, the consequences are immediate and personal. The value of your savings, the security of your job, even the price of food and fuel, these now depend on which side of the divide your country lands. In the 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union left millions in limbo as currencies evaporated and economies shattered. Today, the risk is global. The United States, reading the signs, prepares a response. It is not the first time Washington has faced a challenge to its financial supremacy. During the 1970s, the oil embargo and gold shocks forced a rethinking of strategy. Now, the reply is swift and uncompromising. Any nation adopting Russia's gold mechanism faces exclusion from the Western financial system. No access to SWIFT, no dollar clearing, no international loans or reserves. It is a digital iron curtain, as real as any wall or border. Within days, the world's payments networks are divided. Nations and companies everywhere face an agonizing dilemma. Should they risk isolation from the West to secure access to vital resources, or accept higher costs and possible shortages to remain inside the dollar system? The stakes are no less than national survival and future prosperity. Leaders weigh their options, recalling moments in history when choices defined generations. When Britain left the gold standard in 1931, it triggered a cascade of similar decisions, each with profound consequences. Now the question is not just economic, but political. Should a government risk unrest at home to stand by its allies? Should it break with tradition to protect its people's livelihoods? For families, investors, and businesses, the new reality is inescapable. The myth of a seamless global financial system has been shattered. There are now at least two rival arenas, each with its own rules. The ability to move money, access credit, or secure investments can no longer be taken for granted. In practical terms, this means that individuals must become their own risk managers. Diversifying assets across currencies, countries, and types, stocks, real estate, gold, even skills, is no longer the preserve of the wealthy. It is a necessity for anyone seeking security. The collapse of the Argentine peso, the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, the banking crises in Greece and Cyprus, all serve as reminders of how quickly fortunes can change when trust evaporates. Nations that fail to adapt risk disaster. Collapsing currencies, frozen reserves, and stranded industries are not distant threats, but present dangers. For ordinary people, the effects can be devastating. Savings wiped out, jobs lost, futures upended. Yet those who recognize the shift and act decisively may not only survive, but thrive. In every crisis, there are winners as well as losers. What can you do right now as the new era of financial rivalry dawns? The first step is to understand the risks and opportunities in each system. Study how your country and its institutions are responding. Watch for signs of change in trade policies, reserve holdings, and payment networks. History rewards those who read the signals early. Think of Warren Buffett, who bought gold miners before the last commodity boom, or the families who moved their savings out of collapsing banks ahead of a crisis. Second, diversify. Do not rely on a single currency, a single employer, or a single set of skills. The most resilient households in history, those who survived wars, depressions, and currency collapses, were those who spread their risk. Build networks, learn new skills, and keep part of your wealth in forms that can withstand shocks. Third, demand accountability and transparency from your leaders. The choices made today will echo for decades. In the 1990s, the failure to protect savers in Russia and Eastern Europe led to lost generations. In Iceland, by contrast, public pressure forced reforms that restored stability after the 2008 crisis. Your voice matters, now more than ever. Above all, cultivate critical thinking and adaptability. The world is changing faster than at any time in living memory. The Industrial Revolution remade society in a generation. The digital revolution did the same in less than half that time. Now, the remaking of the global financial order is happening in real time. Those who cling to the old ways risk being left behind. The silent fracture has already occurred. The rules are being rewritten as you read these words. When the dust settles, history will ask, "Did you see the new order coming? And did you act in time?" The decision is yours. The world will not wait. In conclusion, reflect on this. Throughout history, it is not always the loudest events that shape the future. Sometimes, it is the quietest, a signature, a document, a decree quietly posted in the early hours. Today, we stand at such a moment. The path ahead is uncertain, but the need to act is clear. Learn, diversify, hold your leaders to account, and above all, keep your eyes open. The world is changing. Will you change with it?